Coming up, how does density altitude affect you? We have a graphic demonstration.
The most comprehensive examination of GA safety is out, and we'll tell you what it says.
It is the funnest rating that you'll get, and it's really not that hard to get.
Learning really can be fun.
And remembering some true heroes. AOPA Live this week begins in just a moment.
Celebrate 20 years with Sonex Aircraft by building and flying your dream. Quick handling, fun, and capable kit aircraft models to suit your flying passions. Get the best performance per dollar with Sonex Aircraft.
This is AOPA Live This Week with Tom Haynes and Melissa Rudinger.
The most comprehensive study of general aviation safety is about to be released to the world. The 27th annual NAW Report will be published on Friday.
But we have an advanced copy, and the news is very good.
This latest NAW report had a double good news whammy in that on the one, flying activity increased in 2015 by almost 4%, up to about 24 million flight hours across general aviation, and fatal accidents went down. So while we're flying more, we're having fewer fatal accidents, and all that means that another record-setting year of our fatal accident rate, which is down to 0.84 per 100,000 flight hours for 2015.
2015, because the NAW report is an in-depth analysis of NTSB accident reports, and it takes up to 2 years for most of those reports to be completed. The NAW report is what the aviation industry uses to focus its safety improvement effort.
And then we as an industry take that and go figure out how we make things better through better training, better proficiency, better technology, and then, of course, the culture associated with how people fly and the environment they fly in.
So where are the problem areas? Well, as in the past, pilots themselves could make general aviation even safer.
Some 75% of accidents are still due to pilot error. Now the good news is that percentage has stayed relatively stable, but the good news is the raw numbers of those accidents are down this year. So the raw numbers are going down, but I'd still like to see us reduce that percentage.
Loss of control, particularly on takeoff and climb out, continued VFR flight into instrument conditions, and surprisingly, running out of fuel are the most common causes of fatal GA accidents.
We are still seeing fuel management issues. If we were to look at, one area that I would just like to see us eliminate from the NAW report, it just boggles my mind that we're still seeing people run themselves out of gas.
So still plenty of work to be done.
There is. I mean, we're doing the same things over and over again. At least the numbers are going down, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and the whole fuel exhaustion thing is just incredible. We're losing about one airframe a week because of fuel exhaustion accidents. So anyhow, there's a lot to be done. November issue of AOPA Pilot Magazine, I've got a piece coming up that where we address that and talk about some technology solutions that can help make it better.
Good, we'll look forward to that. Well, density altitude isn't a big cause of accidents. There were 4 listed in the NAW report, none of them fatal, but high density altitude is still something you need to pay attention to, and it's particularly important if you're planning to join us a week from now at the AOPA fly-in in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Field elevation there is over 6,000 feet, and on an average day in September, that will put the density altitude at close to 9,000 feet. Warren Morningstar takes a look at what it does to your aircraft's performance.
Chuck Grosvenor has years of experience teaching pilots to fly in the high desert.
Well, it's important to understand that the performance parameters that pilots use when they're landing don't change with altitude. We're going to use the same landing speeds, the same flap configurations, the same power settings generally that you would use at sea level. But what you are going to see is a change in our descent rate as we're coming down to the runway. And even more significantly, we have to understand that as the density altitude gets higher and higher, our ground speed for a given airspeed is going to be quite a bit more.
Here you can see the difference. On the left, landing a 172 at Frederick, Maryland. Density altitude, 2,300 feet. Santa Fe on the right. Density altitude, 8,600 feet. Now, indicated airspeeds are the same in both 172s, but notice the higher ground speed at Santa Fe.
But we still routinely take about 2,000 to 2,500 feet on a typical warm day here in Santa Fe to get a 172 stopped to the point where we can actually turn off the runway safely.
Now, your automatic action on short final here at Santa Fe is likely to go full rich on your mixture. Don't. At the very least, you might be embarrassed.
Yeah, I would bet at least once a month we get an airplane that stops dead in its tracks out there in the middle of the runway, so it's not uncommon. So.
Full rich at 9,000 feet density altitude, and your engine might just stop when pulled back to idle. And worst case, you won't have the power you need for a go-around. So lean to best power while you're still a ways away from the airport and leave it there. Or for an airplane like a 172, you can use this rule of thumb.
I would recommend coming into Santa Fe, use about 1-inch lean mixture on your mixture controls, and that should work quite well.
And here's what you need to think about before takeoff.
With these high density altitudes initially, right off the bat, the airplane's not going to produce sea level power. We generally fly around here in Santa Fe with full throttle, and lucky if we can produce about 70% power on an airplane. So that equates to, when we're flying an airplane, quite a few different performance degradations. It takes us a lot longer to accelerate the aircraft up to flying speed, and after we do get off the ground, our climb performance won't be what it is at sea level. The runway we have here in Santa Fe is 8,000 feet long, and we probably use a good 3,000 feet of it to get up to that 50-foot magic number on a Cessna 172 on a routine basis. So if we don't take into account this kind of items, it can shock a pilot right off the bat.
So while you're still there on the run-up pad, lean the mixture for best power according to your POH.
So once you get up to 18, the first thing we're going to do is lean the mixture out. So go ahead and just lean slowly until you get a drop.
There's a drop.
There's a drop, and I just check over here to lets me know the EGT's working. Get it back up to 1,800.
And as you can see, the airplane just doesn't perform as well at high density altitude. And even high-performance aircraft are affected by density altitude.
Well, the turbocharge helps with the power production on the engine. But you have to remember that the airfoil on the propeller and the airfoil on the wings is operating in that less dense air mass. All right, you may have a turbocharger, but the lift you're going to get out of that wing is still going to be at a degraded position. You're still going to have to sacrifice some climb performance based on what the temperature is doing around here.
There's about 2,000 feet of runway right there before we lift it off the ground. And we're just pumping between 300 and 400 feet a minute is what we normally do out here.
And we're showing 600 feet a minute up.
Warren Morningstar, AOPA Live.
So you've got a lot of flying time. Any density altitude stories you'd like to share?
Surprisingly, with all the flying, most of the flying I've done is in the East, right? But my limited experience in the West, I did have one really eye-opening experience that really drove home the idea that density altitude is a big thing to be considered, particularly in the West, in the Southwest. I was flying a Blanca Super Viking from Las Vegas, bringing it back here to Frederick. I landed in the Four Corners area, spent the night, and was ready to take off the next morning. And fortunately, it was in the morning. That was the only smart thing I did. But I took off with full mixture and paid no attention to the fact that the density altitude was pretty high, and went barreling down the runway, and it took forever to get off the runway.
Imagine
I noticed
that.
It seemed like I thought something was wrong with the airplane. About then, it finally did get off the ground. And it occurred to me seconds later, oh, that's what density altitude will do for you.
There you go, real world experience.
So I'm very attentive now.
I bet.
Well, and speaking of altitude, they just keep getting higher. They are the pilots of the Perlan 2 glider. Over the weekend, they climbed to over 76,000 feet without an engine, mind you. And just for comparison, the altitude record for the jet-powered U-2 spy plane is just under 74,000 feet. And the Armstrong limit, the altitude where human blood boils, well, that's around 60,000 feet. But hey, the Perlan 2 is pressurized.
And here's some news for those of us who fly in the lower atmosphere. Vans Aircraft will start manufacturing the RV-12 at its Aurora, Oregon headquarters. Previously, another company assembled a special light sport aircraft from kits that Vans supplied. The Vans-built RV-12 will have fuel-injected Rotax engines, and the base model is $135,000. And UAvionics says the FAA has just approved TSOs for the SkyBeacon ADS-B out product. This unique solution combines ADS-B, GPS, and altitude sensor into a wingtip mounted unit that includes a strobe and position light. STCs for multiple Cessna and Piper aircraft are expected within a few weeks. It's unclear whether the Garmin patent infringement lawsuit against UAvionics will affect sales of the Sky Beacon.
And speaking of the FAA, the agency celebrated its 60th anniversary last Thursday. Used to be the Civil Aeronautics Authority in the Department of Commerce. Then in 1958, it became an independent and was called the Federal Aviation Agency. Then 9 years later, it was folded into the new Department of Transportation and called the Federal Aviation Administration, which is how we so fondly know it today. But will the FAA exist tomorrow, or rather at the end of the month? That's when the legislation authorizing the FAA is to expire. Word we hear from our people on Capitol Hill is that the responsible committees in both the House and the Senate want to pass a long-term bill before the deadline, but is that there is still going to be debate about amendments that some lawmakers want to hang on the bill. A short-term extension is beginning to look more like a possibility, but, as you may recall, AOPA and the other aviation organizations have told Congress that a long-term bill is really needed for the FAA to operate efficiently and safely.
Regulating airplane noise would be turned over to the EPA under a bill recently introduced in the Senate. Currently, the FAA does that, but if the Quiet Communities Act passes, the EPA would study airport noise and set standards. The bill would also give the EPA the resources to enforce noise regulation. And here is another example of just how contentious and difficult airport noise can be. The San Francisco Examiner is reporting that the City Board of Supervisors will hold a hearing next month to address what one supervisor calls 8 years of continuous noise complaints. The complaints seem to be related indirectly to NextGen. Airliners are flying more precise paths because of NextGen, and that concentrates repeated noise over a small area. So I co-chair the NextGen subcommittee, and this is a really difficult issue for us that we're tackling. We need to get community engagement and community support, and also figure out how we move the noise profiles around to make sure we're not unfairly impacting folks.
Yeah, it's amazing. You fly more precisely, which is really good from an aviation efficiency standpoint, and then it bothers the neighbors. Yep. So you can understand there's always a trade-off. Well, one attorney who has been at the forefront of protecting many GA airports, and for that matter, pilots' rights in general, is our own John Yotis. He is the acknowledged dean of aviation attorneys. For years, his column was among the most popular in AOPA Pilot magazine. He fought the FAA to get Bob Hoover back in the air. And so this week, the AOPA Board of Trustees presented John a Lifetime Achievement Award for his 55 years of service to AOPA and all general aviation pilots.
In our 80-year history, and you think back, John Yotis has been part of it for quite a bit of it. And I don't think anybody has done more for this organization during that period of time than John Yotis.
But I want to tell just a few things to highlight what a great warrior he was among the warriors we have here in our battle to preserve our freedom to fly. He was in at the very beginning, fighting to preserve airspace. He was in at the beginning, fighting off discriminatory landing fees. Massport comes to mind. He's always battled to save airports, save runways.
It's been a long run, but it's been its own reward. My participation with AOPA, as long as it's been, has always been a joy. In my participation with AOPA, I have traveled the whole world, and general aviation in the United States is the envy of the world, and you all are responsible for that. We may see the onslaughts that we feel here domestically, and I know you all deal with them day to day, and it's a very difficult fight, but make the fight, and make the fact that there's the rest of the world looking at us here in the United States in general aviation and envying us about how well we can accommodate our flying activities in the United States and how they can't do it elsewhere in the world.
Congratulations to John. He's such a good guy, and he has been so influential in making sure that we do have these freedoms to fly in this country.
He has. You and I have been privileged to work with John. He's always had an open door and would counsel you. I love that he literally reaches back to Doc Hartranft, the first president of AOPA. He came into AOPA as an intern, I think, a law intern. But literally, there's that continuity throughout the organization. I think that's pretty cool. And congratulations, John, on a wonderful career.
Coming up after the break, more jobs for pilots.
And fun on the water. Don't go away.
You always knew it was your perfect airplane. Now it can have the perfect panel. Garmin G500 TXI and Garmin G600 TXI, the next generation of flight displays.
Welcome back. No matter how experienced you are in aviation, a certificate is still just a license to learn. But nobody says it can't be fun.
Here at AOPA, 2 of our very seasoned aviators went to get a seaplane rating.
I learned to fly in America 20-something years ago. I went back to the UK and worked in the UK for the airlines, flew there.
I started flying in college, and then pretty quickly after that went into the Air Force, flew there for 20 years. We had a lot of fun flying together and flying with Dave Hirschman. We realized that we had the opportunity, thanks to Mark Baker and his Super Cub on Amphibs being here, to get some instruction and get our seaplane ratings, something both of us had in mind for a while. And so we did, and it was a blast.
It was a blast. I've done a bunch of ratings, and it's the best rating I've ever done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it is the funnest rating that you'll get, and it's really not that hard to get.
No, it's not that difficult. It's very different in that you don't have brakes. So that affects everything.
Yeah.
You forget that, you to pause for a minute, you put your feet on the brakes because you've got to put your cell phone in your pocket or something, and you can't.
The flying part, I would say, is the easiest. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing different. It's the once you become a boat or a water vessel part that takes a little bit of thinking.
What challenges did you face, Janet?
What challenges? Trying to keep a straight face. Because I was just smiling the whole time. It's so much fun. Particularly the day I went flying with Dave and his senior chief flight instructor, Yolo, in the back of the airplane. That's my idea of heaven, going flying a float plane with a dog and a friend. Can't get much better than that. Richard, when he was training one day with Dave, Dave jumped out of the airplane and into the water, and Richard went and did a circuit and came back again. It's a different way of going solo when you leave your flight instructor floating in a rather large lake.
We pass our check ride, and now we've got to fly, 2 hours back or so to Frederick.
And it's funny, the airplane just dragged us over to the lake.
It went right over to the lake, and then we splashed, and then we swapped seats, and we splashed again.
Don't know why that happened.
That's the strangest cross-country flight I've ever heard of.
Well, it's like, some airplanes have left-turning tendencies. I think the Cub has water-turning tendencies.
It did that day.
Just an example of how much fun water flying can be.
Exactly.
It is just a hoot. It is so different, and Janet is absolutely right about, once the engine's going, or even if the engine isn't going, you have no brakes, so you're moving with the water. So something to pay attention to. But congratulations to Janet and Richard.
Absolutely, congratulations, and I hope they picked up Dave.
Well, he's back, so I'm sure. He's a good swimmer anyhow. Well, hey, last week we told you about AOPA Ambassador Mike Goulian, and that he's now at the top in the race for points in the Red Bull Air Race Series. And as part of that story, we mentioned the AOPA Brickyard Bash at the Indianapolis Air Race. Well, the bash, it's been bashed. Red Bull made some changes to the program, so we can't do the bash this year. If you already bought a ticket for the Brickyard Bash, we'll refund it, and we'll still be on site in the engagement zone with hat and t-shirt giveaways, activities, and a lot more. And there's more information on our website.
We've been telling you for some time that there's a huge demand for pilots. Here's a real-life example. The Sacramento Bee is reporting that there's a shortage of pilots to fly CAL FIRE's aircraft. An average of 4 of the state's 23 tankers were grounded in August because there weren't any pilots to fly them. CAL FIRE says they're going to need about 40 new pilots in the next few years. Part of the problem is that the firefighting season is now year-round, meaning there is no downtime for pilots in the winter anymore. They just need more pilots than they used to. And if you think you'd like to fly or fix helicopters for a living, there's some scholarships for that. The Helicopter Association International is now accepting applications for its 2019 scholarships. There's money to help you get your commercial helicopter rating or towards maintenance technician training. You can find more information on HAI's website.
And finally this week, next Tuesday is the anniversary of one of the most horrific events in American history. In some ways it feels like it was just yesterday. None of us will ever forget September 11th, 2001, nor the brave people aboard United Flight 93 that prevented an even worse catastrophe. We first aired this video last year, but it bears repeating. Josh Cochran takes us to the Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania.
This once ugly field in Pennsylvania, ugly because of the horrific events that happened here, is now a beautiful memorial.
A real dichotomy between how gorgeous it is and the horrific thing that happened here. And I think that this place is just a really beautiful, beautiful testament to the people who really gave up their lives to save others.
The memorial shows the timeline of the events that fateful September day. It starts with a black stone walkway representing the flight path, with markers for the other flights on September 11th. Towering walls lead up to the visitor center. Mementos and timelines tell the stories of the everyday people who courageously fought against the terrorists that day.
I was so moved by the one child's remembrance in there. He was across from the White House and he said, "Thank you for saving my life."
Outside the visitor center, onlookers can reflect on the overlook of the flight path and the final resting place of Flight 93. On the other side of the memorial, a long path leads to a wall with the passenger and crew names carved in stone. The crash site, open only for passengers' families, is marked with a boulder.
This phase of the memorial was finished in 2015, and the architecture from the visitor center to the wall of names illustrates the bravery of the men and women on Flight 93.
If you look straight toward the wall of names, it looks like one solid piece. However, there's a gap in between each name to symbolize the individuality of each person. If you look sideways, there's almost an accordion effect to the wall, and that's because the passengers and crew joined together at that last moment to try to assault the cockpit and regain control of the plane.
Visitors here agree that the passengers and crew on Flight 93 are true heroes.
The hundreds of people that that would have perished if that plane would have hit the Capitol building or anywhere in DC, really. The courage that took is just, I mean, how can you really describe that?
And they hope that the country as a whole will honor the lives lost on that day.
Unity that came from this event, if we could somehow get that back, in a country that seems to be as divided as I remember it right now, if we could find a way to come together again, I think that's the best way we could honor these people. They didn't fight for us to be fighting.
The Flight 93 Memorial is a worthwhile trip, especially for pilots. Cessna 182 pilot Joe DeAndre flew to Somerset County Airport about 10 miles from the site with family and friends.
From a pilot's standpoint, is what those guys had to go through. And when you see it, it really impacts you.
Josh Cochran, AOPA Live.
Really is a moving sight.
It is very sobering, and we definitely want to remember it and never forget.
Yep, absolutely. That's our show for this week. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is aopalive@aopa.org.
And for those of you in the Southwest, remember our upcoming fly-in to Santa Fe on September 14th and 15th. We hope to see some of you there, and we hope to see all of you back here next week for another edition of AOPA Live This Week.